Welcome to the Autoimmune Campfire.
Join us, coaches Helen and Nona, for honest, heartfelt conversations around living well with a chronic condition.
Come sit at our campfire. There's a chair waiting for you. I always start jamming, woo! Hello, Helen.
Hello, I'm warming my hands on the fire.
Where are the s'mores? Let's get some s'mores. Yes. How are you, Helen?
I'm very well, thanks. I am, so first I want to say welcome to the Autoimmune Campfire, episode 7. Today we're talking about how to nourish yourself. But we're going to start first with, so how, do you want to go first? How are you
No,
doing?
you tell me. How are you?
Okay.
What's going on?
Well, so I am feeling so filled up because we just got back from seeing my youngest in college. She's a senior in college, and it was such a fun weekend. Such a fun weekend. And she's so thoughtful and just filled it with all sorts of yummy things. So that's how I'm arriving. How about you?
Well, as you know, I saw my daughter this weekend too. So we met down at the Great Sand Dunes, which is a national park. It's the craziest thing in the middle of the mountains at 7,000 feet. There are sand dunes. They're the tallest in the United States.
What?
And yeah, I know. It's in the middle of the mountains. It's crazy. And so I met her boyfriend, and her boyfriend's mom, and we had a little mommy play date.
Mommy play date.
Mommy
Love
play
it.
date, and we went sledding on the sand.
On the sand.
It was super fun. But climbing up sand dunes, that is hard. It's very, very hard.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. But it was super fun, and then I got to see another coach.
I saw those pictures on Facebook.
I just get so excited. I was smushing her in that picture. It was so funny.
I think it was mutual joy.
Yeah. And so it was super fun to see her. And she has a gorgeous farm where she runs retreats. She's an Equus coach. She knows Renee. And Jennifer Visitacion, Moonstone Farms. She's a leadership coach, Equus coach. She's just an all around fantastic human being. And her space is fabulous. So I was like, when are we running a retreat here?
I know. Did she have space for a fire pit?
Oh, I'm sure she does. Oh yeah, she does have a fire pit. Mhm.
Okay. All right. Let's just put that in there. Let's put that in our thoughts.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You would love it.
I know I would. I know. And you mentioned Renee. Renee Sievert is one of my colleagues at P-Link Leadership, and she is a master Equus coach and just a phenomenal human being. So I do love how our communities are sort of interconnected, even across the miles.
Yeah, I love that too. It's such a joy to meet with people in person that, are far flung, that you know what I mean? Like that our community is so wide across the world, and of course includes all of our listeners now,
Yes.
which is lovely, which is lovely. Yes. So this week, as you mentioned, we're going to be talking about nourishment. We were going to be talking about nourishment and breath. And then we started having this conversation. We're like, we just have to focus on nourishment. That's all we can do today. I'm sorry. Anyway, so we are going to dive into I want to say, somewhat challenging, messy topic of what do we eat? How do we do this? How do we eat when we have an autoimmune disorder? And that's complicated by a lot of factors. Anyway, do you want to start us off?
Yeah. So when we were talking about this in preparation, we were talking about, that quote by Hippocrates, let food be thy medicine and medicine be thy food. And we were sort of like, yes, right. And you said the best thing, which I thought was great, was like, it's a shit sandwich, right? You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. And that nutrition shouldn't be hard, but somehow it is in our culture. So we were going to share a little bit about what we learned in our own journeys with how we nourish ourselves. But what would you add before we go there?
Mm. I mean, the first thing I would say just before we start this conversation, that quote by Hippocrates is such a good quote, but it's also okay to be a person who's not going to change your food. Like, you and I talked about this, like, we both know people who have autoimmune conditions who are like, "It's hard enough." No.
For
And
sure.
that is a fair statement. There is no judgment. That's the first thing I wanna say, like, that is a valid choice.
Yes.
And, like, for you and I think you and I are both like, "What can I do to support myself?" Like, that is sort of like our like, what else do I need to do? What else can I change? How can I so that's just the lens that we're looking at this through, because there are a lot of people, I think, who, when they are diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, are like, "What can I do?"
Mhm. Yes. It feels really good to have some agency in the face of something like this. And how we nourish ourselves is where we have some agency and autonomy, right? Um, but, one of the things I think, doctors have minimal training on nourishment and diet, like minimal in medical school. And so, perhaps there's more with integrative physicians or lifestyle physicians for sure. But it's really it's really challenging to even get the advice and understand, well, where's it coming from and how valid is it, right? Because there are just so many different opinions out there from medical and non-medical experts saying, if you do this, you'll go into remission or you'll get better or you can cure this. And, lots of things being sold out there on the internet that may or may not help. So I think it's that's the thing that we were thinking about. I love your perspective that about,
We'll get that. We'll
oh,
talk
I'm not
about
gonna,
it. We're gonna
yeah,
talk about it
what is
later.
it?
Well, I'm just gonna say really quick because I think, let's dive into our stories. Um, so when I was diagnosed with MS, I was already doing a particular program that's actually more about food addiction. And so I had stopped eating flour and sugar. And I had noticed, not it's been 4 years since I've eaten flour and sugar, and it was tremendously good for my body to just not have any flour or sugar. Now, I wanna mention here, if you don't know who Gretchen Rubin is, she has this great theory about there are 2 kinds of people, that there are moderators and there are abstainers. I am an abstainer, and the whole concept around moderation, and intuitive eating and, just following your food signals is really in support of moderators. I'm not one of those people. So if you are a moderator, embrace it, love it, do it. That is not me. And there are probably those of you out there too who are listening who are also not moderators, and that's okay. There's not a lot of social support for abstainers. I don't drink, I don't smoke, I don't eat sugar, I don't eat flour. I go to bed on time. I am an abstainer. These are the things I do that really support my body. And yes, I have been called rigid. It's true. I don't care. But so I was already doing those things when I got diagnosed, and I was honestly kind of smug about it. I was like, I'm already doing all the things. Like, I don't need any of this. But then but because of my own, like, anxiety about, like, well, I wanna do more. I wanna make sure I'm doing everything I can do, and I think that's not uncommon for people like you and
No,
me
not at all.
who are like, "Okay, what else do I need to do?" And so I started looking at the complement of diets that are geared towards people with MS. And it's true, not eating flour and sugar or processed foods, it really covers a lot of bases, when you look at it. And as I was looking at the diets, I was finding myself getting more and more anxious about it. Because of course there's stuff at like the eat nothing but meat end of the spectrum and then be a vegan. And they both claim that they're the only way.
Mhm, mhm.
And that perpetuates fear and anxiety, and that just alone is unhelpful
Yeah.
for your health. So,
Yes.
but so it really, I finally kind of had to come to a place where I was like, what I'm doing is enough. I don't need to do more. When I kind of stepped back and looked at the overarching health of my diet and what I do. So, I feel actually quite lucky that I did all those things coming into it because I can't imagine like being a drinker, a smoker, or somebody who stays up late, somebody who's, like somebody who's like loving life. Like, let's be honest, like somebody who's really loving life, who's then told, well, or starts looking at these paths because you're right, your doctor isn't going to probably tell you anything about what you should do with your diet. Mine didn't. He was actually sort of dismissive when I told him about my diet. He was like, whatever. Who cares? Just keep exercising. Like that's what my doctor, like literally, it was like, we don't care about your diet, just keep exercising. And I'm like, well, okay, that's fascinating because if you go look at the MS society or you look like they all have like here are some like basic guidelines for people who have autoimmune disorders. The doctors don't talk about that. But anyway, I think it would be really hard to look at those guidelines as someone who maybe like really enjoys sugar and flour and processed foods and drinking and smoking. Like it would be really hard to then turn that all around and do something different. So I felt really lucky that I had just had a lot of prompting and nudges over the years to implement different things because it literally has taken me probably since my mid 20s to get to this point with the way that I exercise, the way that I take care of my body, the way I manage stress, the way I eat, you know?
All of the things. So I just want to acknowledge that you have been so tuned in to your body and your needs all this time. So it's not just like, oh, I was really lucky because I got to this point and there was another big shift, but that I didn't ask for, right? But the thing is that you already made these changes. You already made these changes because you acknowledged something in your body and the shifts, right, that it made that served you.
Can I tell you another so one of the things that I noticed about what happened when I stopped eating flour and sugar, so like I said, I had not stopped for any reason except for I couldn't stop eating sugar and flour when I'd start eating it, right? So it really was like almost addictive process, and we don't want to argue about that. We're just not going to. But the thing I'm going to say something that's like uh, so one of the things that I had noticed over the years is I had bladder issues. Like I would feel like I had a bladder infection and I'd go to the doctor and they'd be like, you don't have a bladder infection. I'm like, but I literally feel like I have to pee all the time. Right. And that's pretty much stopped. Like that, and that was so the like when you're talking about like listening, like I'm like, oh, I bet like if I would notice that when I ate less sugar, my bladder wasn't spasticky. So I mean, and I know this is like a really common thing for people who have MS, at least the spastic bladder stuff, and bladder issues. And so, like, but that's one of the examples of like something that was happening like fairly frequently, that didn't really have any explanation medically, like from a bladder infection perspective. That I was like, oh, I wonder, I'm noticing that if I eat less sugar, then this happens. I bet it. And then when I stopped eating sugar and flour, it really improved. I just wanted to say that to your point because I know a lot of people with MS can really struggle with the bladder stuff. And there are diets on the vegan end of the spectrum that don't limit or restrict sugar intake. But I have really found that really, really helped that.
Yes. Yeah. And there's so much information out there about sugar, and there's a great movie about it where they researched the impact of sugar on inflammation and basically, so that, I mean, I think there's not as much really great evidence-based stuff on food because it's expensive to run these trials. And so, and the food industry is so large that they counter, right? Perhaps. Um, and so, yes, I think you said to me when we were talking last week, run the experiment, right? And I know we're going to talk about that in our learnings, but it's so powerful. You ran the experiment, and then you've had some productive motivation to stay where you're at, right? And I think that's the thing. We get so pressured by, oh well, I could get better if I just did this,
Mhm.
and I think it's that, well, if I can I think it sometimes feels like, if well, then I can control it. Well, if I can control it, then, why wouldn't I? Because it's really unpleasant to be in a flare. And sometimes you can be doing all the, in inverted commas, right things and still flare. And so it can be very frustrating.
Absolutely. And so we actually talked about this too, and I don't think this is actually in our learnings, but, like, the way that you eat, has to feel good today.
Yes. So it tags back to what we were talking about with pleasure. Right? Are we starving ourselves of pleasure in what we're eating? And that doesn't mean that we need to have 15 donuts for breakfast, but, did we make something that really felt lovely? Right? So right now I'm drinking ginger tea. It's just raw ginger in hot water. It feels like a hug on
Me
the inside.
too.
Are you drinking ginger tea
I'm
too? Because
drinking my
we're raised on ginger tea.
ching.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's literally couldn't be easier. Just chop some ginger and stick it in with some boiling water, and it infuses, and it's delicious. So I take great pleasure from that, especially at this, when is it starting to get a little chilly?
Mhm.
Yeah.
So I wanna hear about your journey with food, because I know yours is really interesting, and I'm sure not uncommon, because you have food allergies that also are part of your journey with, how do I nourish myself now with an autoimmune condition? So I would love it if you told us more about that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, yes. So at 42, I started having allergic reactions every day to food. And so I was just like a walking hive, and I'm anxious, right? Because sometimes I would feel my mouth swelling, my throat's closing, and ended up at an allergist, and he did, something like 65 sort of pinpricks down, and, and I think something like 59 things came up, like my arms were just completely swollen. And he goes, we're going to have to resolve this by phone. Like, I don't even, he was like, I don't even know where we're going to start today. Okay, well, just don't have any of these things until we've talked. Meanwhile, then I ended up losing about 20 pounds because my diet became so restrictive until I could safely add things back in. And, I mean, let's be honest, when you have somewhat like mild to severe food allergies, whoever wants to use an EpiPen? Like I carry them everywhere, but I'm like, is today really a nice day to have a severe allergy? No, I think I'm just going to avoid those things. And so then my diet became kind of like this. Fast forward to, and I added things in over time, and so I think it was much healthier. I've always been a pretty, in inverted commas, healthy eater. And when we talk about diet, we're not talking about weight loss diets or anything. We're talking about diet as in what you eat, what you put in your mouth, right? We're talking about the food that nourishes you. And so I kind of grew up on, like, my mom worked, but everything was cooked from first principles. In fact, I used to feel like when I was a kid, like, oh, can't we have one of those pizzas that comes out of the little plastic wrap? No, it had to be like baked dough and all fresh vegetables from the garden. Like, I mean, it was, we had really a great foundational nutrition education, even as little kids.
Listen, everyone needs a co-conspirator to reimagine their lives and uncover the opportunities in the challenges they face. If you are looking for the place where hope meets possibility and you are ready to create a life of meaning despite the diagnosis, look no further. Helen is a certified professional coach with a background in medical research and an autoimmune diagnosis who brings compassion, empathy, and your best interests to every conversation. Learn more about coaching with Helen at helensampsonmullen.com.
So anyway, so fast forward to my RA diagnosis, and now I'm all over, researcher on fire, trying to fix this, fueled by anxiety. And let's talk about the shame of like not being a good enough person now because I have a diagnosis that is unwanted, right? It's like that. It's just really, I never thought about it before I had this, but I was like, ooh, that's shame, what I'm feeling right now. It just feels like that downward spiral. And so I was all over searching different things. And there were various programs that were juicing and then all sorts of things. And then there were the whole food plant-based, sort of vegan type things. And then there's, like you said, only eat meat, or the kind of paleo type, keto type things. And so I went with, and then I was reading this one that this gentleman had completely reversed his RA completely. And he'd had very severe RA. And I was like, I could do that. And then I looked at it and it was juicing celery for the first week. And I'm like, well, I'm allergic to celery. Like, so I'd be dead. That would resolve it. So I was like, oh my goodness. Right. I mean, so I opted for a vegan option, but the vegan option has so many grains in. I was puffed up because what I know about my body is it doesn't do really well with grains. And so over time, I think that contributed to me ending up getting worse, because not only was I resistant to the medicine, but I was also eating a lot of things that were in my body causing inflammation. And, reading all the things saying, oh, that's an inflammatory food, I won't do that. But then not actually checking or running the experiment, trusting the research versus my own body.
Oh, can we just stop there and just that right there is like, this is what the research says. Let me override what I know about myself.
Exactly. Isn't it fabulous?
Oh, well, I mean, it's like so normal,
Bless her cotton socks. She's doing the best she can.
right? I mean, and then what you were saying too about like getting the diagnosis and being like, oh, right, because food fixes everything. So if I'm sick, then I've done something wrong.
Wrong. Yes.
And like,
Yeah.
can we just say no to
Mm.
both of those things?
Yes.
No,
No. Right? A
no.
strong no. In fact, actually, one of my best friend, from college, she just said, you don't deserve this. Nobody deserves this. This is just terrible luck, it just is, right? It just is. Not even that it's bad luck. It just is. I think that's where self-compassion comes in and can be really like, how can I just, the common humanity of having a condition.
See, I'm not sure. Okay, so I'm just gonna say I don't think compassion. I'm like being mad that that is the way that we believe that we're like spun up in our culture to think about food. Okay, everybody, if you're a self-compassion person, go with Helen. If you wanna burn it all down, come with me.
Well, so
Yeah.
So I think it's both and, because Kristen Neff's newer work on fierce self-compassion is the compassion that helps you, like fuels yourself to burn it down, is the big no,
Yes.
right? Or the F no. And so, yes, because what we haven't talked about, well, so let me finish up this story. So
I'm sorry. I
basically,
totally
no, no,
interrupted you because I was like, "No."
no. So it's
Okay.
both and, right? There's that self-compassion, which is, how do I, notice how I'm feeling? So the mindfulness, like the common humanity, I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this suffering. And then the self-kindness, how do I be kind to myself? The fierce compassion is like, how do I speak up? Like, it's different, right? So, but they're both compassion. But what I ended up coming up with is what I call the Heli diet, because I've been prescribed so many different diets and they don't work for me. So I know that when I have gluten in my diet, I am covered in a rash from head to toe. I have severe migraines and feel just absolutely dreadful. So I don't do gluten anymore. But that's just for me. Other people do great on gluten, right? I've followed various different eating programs, and then now I'm doing what you do, which is run the experiment. How did I feel the next day after that? That's pretty good. You know, so I found that if I eat a lot of sugar, my joints hurt immediately. I found if I eat potato chips, so talking about ultra processed foods, then I hurt, so there are things that I can directly see, and then I can eat really great foods and still hurt at times as well. So it's a very hard experiment to run. But yes, let's talk about the bill of goods that we're sold.
Well, I mean, like, really, we're like moving into learnings, because I think like when we're talking about that, it's like these are the things that you and I have taken away. And so, do you want to dive into the first one, or do you want me to?
You go for it.
Okay, I'm going to go for it. So, you know, we have alluded to this, and I think it's just important to know and to really recognize that certainly as women, we are handed a shit sandwich, as Helen said, around our relationship with food and our bodies. And so then coming into an autoimmune condition and being like, okay, now how do I do this but still be body positive and still be like doing all the right things? But it's like what Helen just said is so important. Like, you have to figure out what works for you. And I love this is one of the reasons why Helen and I are so good together in this, because Helen is like all love and I am like, I have spears and I'm like, what are they doing to us? Like, the culture is just crap when it comes to food. We are confused because one, food is made to actually be so hyper palatable that you just want to eat more, and then you feel like crap, but then you want to eat more, but then you feel like crap, and then you gain weight, and then you're like, oh God, there's something wrong with me. And then you've got the whole like, well, if you would just eat right, then nothing would ever go wrong in your body. So it's all your fault. And it's like, no, we just have to put that down and listen to our own bodies. Okay.
For sure.
Okay, I'm done now. I'll put my spear down over here. My match.
Never put that spear down. I love it. I love this feist. So yes, first one, exactly. Second one is there are so many different eating programs. Some are more research than others. And some work for some people and others work for others, right? And so we want to take a wider lens and ask, okay, so what's common across these programs?
Yeah.
Or, if or, and what is it that we might want to, what feels like nourishment in our body? But I think the most important thing is, and you came up with this, Nona, and I absolutely love this, is in being honest with yourself, right? Because you could say, well, cupcakes feel awesome in my body, and yet maybe they do. And then, maybe not, right? So, I mean, so if you look at the spectrums that we talked about with, totally vegan and versus totally sort of meat, and you look at what is it that's common, we're looking at vegetables and fiber and protein and healthy fats and no ultra processed food that I like to think of. I used to subscribe to this nutrition newsletter. Of course I did. And they, on the back page, they would call out some, what they called, it was the food porn page, and they would have 3 different foods and why they were food porn. And it just like made me laugh. But things like coffees that were 1,200 calories with,
Yeah.
decades of cholesterol in, just like for a coffee, for a cup of coffee, or a latte or whatever. I mean, just things like this. So we just want to be aware. And then what sits well, are we really honest with ourselves with the results of the experiment? Like if we're running the experiment, are we being honest with what happened? Right? I know that I make these delicious bean brownies that are high in protein and high in fiber, but if I have too many of them, I hurt. So I'm honest with myself about that.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, really, what Helen just alluded to is common sense. I mean, really, I mean, like, we get so caught up in the marketing and this and that and the fear that these people instill in us. Like, if you don't do this, it's all going to shit, But it's like, it's all common sense.
Yes. But can I just say common sense is not often common practice. So we need to practice with our sense.
Absolutely. I mean, what you said about the bean brownies, it's like, well, these are healthy, but for you, they make you hurt if you eat too many. That's so good to know. And like when I was eating cupcakes all the time, well, guess what? All I wanted to eat was cupcakes because cupcakes beget cupcakes in my system. And that leads to all pain, bladder suffering, headaches, foggy brain. Like the it's like that doesn't work. Like so that too, I just want to say, like, if you are making a decision to cut out like high sugar and ultra processed foods, there's going to be a process that's going to be a little bit painful for a couple days, while your body's like, why, you know? And then you get more familiar with like what actually feels like nourishment. Yeah. And that kind of goes to what makes you feel good today, which is the third learning. Like, I often think about like what is really going to make me feel good today. And what makes me feel good today is also going to lead me to waking up feeling good tomorrow. Feeling good tomorrow starts today. And if I'm going to feel crappy tomorrow if I eat too many bean brownies, then what I ate today didn't actually make me feel good. And that really goes back to advocacy, boundaries, pleasure, right? Like, what does real pleasure look like when it comes to food? And how do we and it comes when you're feeding a family or you're eating with other people, you have to be willing to self-advocate and set boundaries around what you're gonna eat and how you're gonna nourish yourself. Now, I don't know why that feels good today. That feels good today and tomorrow. Okay, it might not feel good today if you set boundaries, but it will feel good tomorrow.
Well, I think we were talking about what feels good today is how you make your decisions. And sometimes when I'm really struggling, when those bean brownies are like speaking to me from the freezer, I think about my tomorrow self. I actually think I project all the way out and I see the little old lady that is me who's going, "Oh, thank you for taking care of me." When I'm struggling with that decision today, because I think that I'm also not a moderator.
Yeah. It's really worth it. Gretchen Rubin, are you a moderator or are you an abstainer? I mean, it's a really interesting thing to consider when you're thinking about food in particular, especially foods that tend to be hyper palatable and more addictive. I love your speaking to the crone self.
Mhm.
And I think in the moment too, that could be really powerful. Do you ever like think in the moment, like, what would my elder self do?
Yeah, I do. And I see her. I see her as this little old lady, and she's like, "Thank you for taking such good care of me." She's not like, "What? Pop that brownie down." Like, she's not that. 'Cause that's not helpful. And she's not judgy. That's
That
not
would
that's
be
not
my elder
helpful.
self. She would be like, "What in the F are you doing? Put it down."
So you're in the present works for you, and if I can't reach it in the present, I think out to who do I want to be? As I sit in my infusion chair, I'm surrounded by little old ladies in the infusion suite, and I think, "Go women," you know? They made it.
They
Mhm.
did. Oh, I love that. I really do. I love that, and I'm gonna take that with me as well. Because, some of that, I definitely have my moments where I'm like, okay, but what I'm like eating that I shouldn't eat is not, I'm like, am I going to eat some extra rice? Like, okay, listen, whatever. Okay, but I'm going to take the elder self with me. I think that's amazing. Okay, so we wanted to share, like, there are so many autoimmune conditions, and there are kind of some standard practice things that are recommended across the board for people who have autoimmune conditions to support your body. So tell us about that.
Well, I mean, I think we've touched on a bunch of them, but this was just like a little Google search on autoimmune condition diets. Avoid processed foods, eat more plant-based foods, get enough protein, add healthy fats, eat fermented foods like sauerkraut, address food sensitivities, although I'm a great big one. Avoid high sodium foods. Consider intermittent fasting. I've tried that. That didn't work for me. So they were suggesting the autoimmune protocol diet or gluten-free diet. But also, I think we're not really recommending any particular eating plan or nourishment plan. We're saying what works for you. Like, how do you honor the human body that you are inhabiting?
When we were talking earlier about kind of across the board, what different healthy diets look like, I think three of the main things are ultra processed foods, eliminating that. If there is actually a book out, it's called Ultra Processed Foods. It's by a researcher from Britain. It is a fantastic walk through ultra processed foods. And he shares research as to the impact of ultra processed foods on our bodies, and lots of vegetables, right?
Yeah, because fiber is really important.
Fiber, no sugar. I personally think that the no gluten and no sugar is it's a standard now. I mean, like, I think that's gonna come more into people's awareness as time goes on. And for those of you who are moderators, moderate away.
Moderate, enjoy.
Enjoy that. Exactly.
Enjoy your little bit of bean brownie.
That's right. That's right. Enjoy that. So, is there anything else that you wanna add? I would just like to say I think we did a great job talking about this.
We are, like, can you see we are solidly on our soapboxes here?
Yes, we are. I'm gonna try not to fall off when I get off the call. Yeah.
Um, we welcome your comments and experiences. We'd love to hear from you. Next time, we are going to talk about rest, which we were supposed to talk about this time, but you can see we have plenty to say about nourishing ourselves.
We really do, and we really do welcome the conversation, because it really is, like, what works for your body to thrive with an autoimmune condition. Yeah. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.
Mwah.
Mwah.
Did you enjoy this campfire conversation? Please rate our podcast wherever you're listening to light the way for others to find the autoimmune campfire. The information provided on the autoimmune campfire is for educational or informational purposes only. It is not intended nor implied as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always, always consult your physician or other qualified healthcare provider with any questions you might have regarding a medical condition or treatment plan. The Autoimmune Campfire does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on this site or podcast. Recording and editing wizardry by Make Your Day Richer. Thanks for joining Helen and I around the campfire.